Hi, today we are focused on standard MSPS 1-3, which talks about making sense of information that to describe that synthetic materials come from natural resources and that they impact society. Today we're focused on a synthetic material called bioplastic, and we're going to be looking at different types as well as the advantages and disadvantages. So first, let's talk about regular plastic. So, as you guys have learned in the past few weeks, regular plastic is made out of petroleum, or they're known as petroleum-based plastic. The advantages of petroleum-based plastic is that they can be molded, colored, and shaped into many different things. They make our lunch packaging, cups, car parts, electronics, and clothes. They're very strong and durable, and they're very cheap and easy to manufacture. So it's used quite often. Unfortunately, there are some disadvantages of petroleum-based plastic, and this is review, but again, they are made out of a non-renewable resource like petroleum. They don't biodegrade. That means that microorganisms and other decomposers cannot eat them and return the nutrients back into the soil. Instead, they photodegrade, and this is a picture of photodegradation right here on the bottom. And as you can see, the sunlight is breaking down the plastics in the ocean into smaller bits, and they form small bits that look like food, and when ocean animals ingest them, it could cause a lot of problems for them, and it does move up the food chain. So it does pollute oceans, rivers, communities, and ecosystems. This is a photo of the LA River right after a storm. As you can see, all of that plastic trash, if this net is kind of holding it back, but if that net was not there, that would all go into the ocean and affect the ecosystems there. Plastics can also contain toxic chemicals that can be harmful to organisms, and many disposable items are made out of plastics, and usually most of them are used for only a few minutes before they're thrown out, and like cups, bottles, wrappers, and bags. Most of these are unrecyclable, and unfortunately, if they are not disposed of properly or if they get littered, they end up in the ecosystem, which can in turn affect us. So those are the disadvantages of the petroleum-based plastic. So now let's look at some alternatives. One alternative is bioplastic. Bioplastic is a type of plastic that's made from natural renewable materials, like corn, potatoes, and other plants. Its base is a starch, so any plant actually produces this molecule called a starch, and they use that starch to make new kinds of plastics like you see in this picture. As you can see, it says biodegradable and compostable, which leads me to the next section, which talks about the advantages. So the advantages of using bioplastics are that they are renewable. That means they're made from plant sources like corn. They're biodegradable, meaning that they will break down, they can be broken down by microorganisms and decomposers to return back into the soil to be recycled through natural cycles of matter. So here's a picture of biodegradation. They could technically be edible, although some bioplastics are not, but there are some that can be edible. They're non-toxic, meaning that they do not contain harmful chemicals for the environment or for any organisms. Certain bioplastics claim that they use less energy to manufacture, such as PLA bioplastic uses significantly less energy to manufacture than other types of plastic. And in turn, because it uses less energy, it can release fewer greenhouse gases, which can help with the problem of global warming. Now, although there are advantages, there are some disadvantages as well. So let's take a look at the disadvantages. So here are some disadvantages of using bioplastics. The first one is that some types of bioplastics can actually release methane, which is a type of greenhouse gas if they are in landfills. So this is a problem with our food waste as well, is that when things like food or raw materials decompose in the landfills, a lot of methane gets trapped, and this methane gas is actually a lot more dangerous than carbon dioxide. It causes more global warming than carbon dioxide. Luckily, there are some landfills that capture the methane. So this is a picture of a landfill that is capturing the methane to actually convert it to energy. And so some landfills do this, not all landfills, but that is one potential solution to the problem of methane produced in landfills. Another disadvantage is that there's a debate that the corn used to make these plastics could have been food for people in need. So, we use lots and lots of plastic items. If all of those plastic items were going to be made out of corn, there's a concern over sustainability and food sources. And there's also a concern over if all of these things are made out of corn, is it going to raise up food prices and make food less accessible for people in need? A third argument against bioplastics is that they are actually not as easily recycled as PET currently. There's actually a lot of confusion over how to recycle bottles made from, let's say, PLA. This is a plant bottle here that's actually made out of half PET and half bioplastic. There's just so many different types of bioplastic out there that the consumers are confused about how exactly these things are to be recycled. Some need to be composted. That means that they need to be put in a compost bin. Uh, and if you put a compostable cup in the recycling bin, it actually really messes with the recycling system and it makes the recycling process less efficient. So that's another challenge, is that there needs to be more communication over how some of these plastics should be handled after use. So now let's talk about some different types of bioplastics. The first one I'm going to talk about is called starch-based bioplastic. And this is the type of bioplastic that we're going to be making in our classroom. So starch-based bioplastics are made from direct plant starch. And starch is a type of molecule found in the cells of all plants. And so we take starch from different plants like corn or potato, tapioca, and other plants, and you can combine them with other simple molecules like acetic acid and glycerin to make different types of bioplastic. And again, we can make this really simply with simple ingredients, and we'll do some of these in our classroom. Some of the disadvantages of starch-based bioplastics is that it has poor water resistance and strength. That means that it's not necessarily waterproof. It does melt pretty quickly in water, and it's not very strong. However, you can combine the starch with other types of materials to add strength. One really easy example is PVA, or polyvinyl acetate. This is a type of synthetic polymer that's found in our white school glue. And although it's synthetic, it is completely biodegradable. So if you were to add this to our starch-based bioplastic, it actually adds strength without harming the environment as much. Here's a picture of medicine capsules. A lot of you have asked me if this is actually plastic, and the answer is it is actually a type of starch-based bioplastic. It does melt in our stomachs and it releases medicines gradually. Some other things that the starch-based bioplastics make are compost bags, disposable eating utensils, and these packing peanuts, as you see here. Another type of bioplastic is PHB, or polyhydroxybutyrate, and let me zoom in for you guys. There you go. This type of bioplastic is made from bacteria that eat starch and produce another type of molecule. This process is called fermentation. And I'm not going to go into the details of fermentation so much because you're going to be learning about that more in high school, but just know that when bacteria break down certain types of sugar, they release another molecule or alcohol, and we call that process fermentation. Fermentation is the same process that's used to make beer and bread as well. When yeast cells eat the sugar to make the bread, it makes the bread rise. PHB produces a plastic similar to polypropylene, or plastic number 5. It's highly water resistant and can be molded into different shapes. Some items that PHB makes are disposable razors, eating utensils, dishes, plant pots, and shampoo bottles. And here's a photo of decomposable plastic utensils. One last type of bioplastic that I will talk about is PLA, or polylactic acid. This is one of the more common types of bioplastic you may have heard of. This type of bioplastic is made from lactic acid. And again, lactic acid is a type of acid that's produced from renewable sources like corn, potato, wheat, rice, and sugarcane. PLA is water resistant and grease resistant. It could be molded into different shapes and produces a plastic similar to PET plastic number 1 and polystyrene plastic number 6. Some of the things that PLA can make are plastic wrappers, films, plastic containers, utensils, coatings for paper, compost bags, medicines, and clothing. And here are some images of some PLA items. This is a candy wrapper. As you can see, it looks very similar to regular wrappers that we've seen, except this is completely made out of renewable sources. Here's a compost bag made out of PLA, and this is a pen that's made out of PLA. And again, PLA looks very similar to PET. And again, that's why sometimes people don't recycle it correctly. It's supposed to be composted, and that could actually mess with the recycling system. So now let's talk about environmental impacts of bioplastics. So some three positive environmental impacts. One, some bioplastic require fewer fossil fuels for production, and that in turn decreases the greenhouse gas emissions and our impact on global warming because there's fewer fossil fuels being used. This graph from a research study done at the University of Michigan actually compares the global warming potential or the amount of carbon dioxide released for manufacturing PLA versus PET. PLA is in blue here and PET is in green. And as you can see, PLA for both studies actually have less global warming potential than PET plastic. Another positive environmental impact is that less toxic waste and chemicals are released into the environment when they biodegrade. So remember, a disadvantage of petroleum-based plastics is that it could release bad chemicals like phthalates or BPA or styrene into the environment, which can negatively impact living things. But when these plastics are decomposed or composted, it actually breaks down into plant matter, which is better for the environment. Now let's look at some negative environmental impacts. So first, the production and transportation of bioplastics still uses petroleum. So the companies still use petroleum to run their factories or tractors and to even harvest the corn. This is a graph or a graphic from the same research study done at the University of Michigan. And as you can see, it actually compares the amount of carbon dioxide released to produce PET versus bioplastic. And as you can see, the amount of carbon dioxide released during transportation and production is actually very similar. 751 kilograms of carbon dioxide versus 743 for petroleum-based cups. And so there's really no significant difference between PLA and PET. And one of the disadvantages is that for PLA, to harvest the corn and to deliver the corn to the factory still uses petroleum. Another negative impact of bioplastic is that because bioplastic requires crops and plants to produce, the increased use of bioplastic can actually increase the amount of soil erosion and deforestation because we need more land to plant more crops. And that could eventually have a negative impact as well, because it could destroy ecosystems. One last negative impact is the fact that more fertilizers and more pesticides will be used to farm more crops for the bioplastic. Fertilizers and pesticides are used to increase the crop yield and production during farming, and sometimes they can leak into nearby ecosystems and cause what we call eutrophication. Basically, eutrophication is when there's too many nutrients in a body of water, and that leads to oxygen being depleted and animals dying. And this graph here from the same University of Michigan study actually compares and shows the potential of eutrophication of PLA versus PET. And again, PLA, which is in blue, has a significantly larger potential of eutrophication than PET. These are some sources that I used